A catastrophic collision happened during a busy Monday afternoon. According to the reports we received, a man was talking to his phone and swerved sharply. Another motorist was surprised when he suddenly changed lanes and lost control, which made a chain of collisions in two different lanes. One of them tried to avoid the pileup, but his attempt made things worse when he crashed into a gas station, which caused a huge explosion. A total of 24 people were hurt, with several cars wrecked beyond repair. 5 casualties were mere bystanders who were just in front of the establishments at the side of the road. 18 of them had died. The ones who managed to survive this tragedy had major injuries with multiple broken bones and third-degree burns. Amongst those who got involved, only one was completely unscathed, and she was a 15-year-old girl named Elizabeth Carmine. She was admitted in the hospital along with the other victims to make sure that she was healthy and aid the potential traumatic experience that she might be having. I was assigned to meet this fortunate girl personally and take her statement, but the things that she told me and the other information that I discovered about her were quite baffling and alarming. Just like what was stated in the initial report, she was physically unharmed despite of where she was standing during the terrible incident that claimed many lives. According to the witness, she was standing at the side of the road where the collision happened. Surprisingly, the other unfortunate bystanders who were swooped by the wildly spinning cars were just a few feet away from her. Some even said that they saw her casually walking out of the fire after the explosion. These statements could simply be mere exaggerations, but what surprised me was how calm she was when I went to her room. With a subtle smile on her face, Elizabeth was sitting up on her bed with a distant gaze on the window. The scene of the unfortunate tragedy was quite ghastly. Due to the severity of the collision, some of the victims' bodies were brutally dismembered. Their faces smashed on the windshields, while the unluckier ones were completely thrown out and decapitated by the vehicles that crashed next to them. Those who managed to survive but got trapped in their cars were caught in the explosion and burnt to death. I was expecting to see a survivor who was deeply traumatized after witnessing such horror. However, Elizabeth was surprisingly calm and collected. I asked her how she was feeling, but she smiled at me and said that she had a good sleep. I wondered how a young girl even managed to sleep after such a tragedy, but I just assumed that she had a strong heart and mind. In fact, it was a bit unsettling how fine she was. I asked Elizabeth what she could remember, and I thought that it was obvious that I was pertaining to the incident. But instead of talking about the tragedy, she talked about the breakfast that she had that morning. It seemed that she wasn't even interested to talk about it. Being considerate with my next question, I asked her where her parents were instead. I thought that perhaps she was indeed deeply affected by the tragedy, that she was deliberately avoiding to discuss it. But just as when I was being sympathetic, she bluntly told me they also died in the accident as well. It was my mistake for not reading through the files before going there. Apparently, she was under the care of her candidate foster parents. She didn't have their surname because she was not officially adopted yet. Since we were already on the same page, I decided to go with it. For the second time, I asked her what she could remember about the catastrophic incident that she managed to survive. She told me that her new parents were buying something from a shop when she walked around for a bit. Her candidate parents happened to be the 2 bystanders who were crushed by one of the cars that spun off the road. I was finally hearing the information that I came for, although I did not expect to hear a vivid description of a brutal death from a young survivor. She described to me how her foster father was gutted by the flapping hood of the car that tumbled sideways over the curb. She also described how her foster mother tried to run, but her brain splattered on the ground when she was flattened by the car that flipped upside down. This 15-year-old girl spoke of these horrendous scenes so nonchalantly, and even went on to describe the victims who were burnt alive. I was speechless for a moment, and the only reply that came to my mind was how fortunate she was to walk out of it without a single scratch. It was then when the conversation suddenly took a very strange turn. Elizabeth Carmine claimed that she was protected by her guardian angel. Based on my initial impression on this young lady, I did not take her for a religious kind. My phone rang, and I had to walk out of her room for a moment to answer the call. It was from the station, and they gathered some new information about Elizabeth. I was utterly dumbfounded when I heard about her past records. In a way, her claim for having a guardian angel suddenly made sense to me. Apparently, this was not the first time that Elizabeth Carmine was involved in a tragedy. Her background record stated that she was orphaned while she was 3 years old. She was rescued by the firefighters from their burning home that claimed the lives of her biological parents. The poor child did not live an easy life since then. Elizabeth was transferred from one orphanage to another, and all of them were due to unfortunate incidences. The very first orphanage that she was brought to was destroyed by an earthquake and went out of commission, and the second shelter was bombed when they were caught between the fight of the soldiers and terrorists. The third orphanage she was brought in had violated a number of building codes, and their structures collapsed while the staffs and children were inside them. With the 3 of those tragic occurrences that resulted to countless deaths, Elizabeth was the only one who walked out without a single scratch on her. To top off her remarkable survivability rate, her record also showed that she had been through a number of foster parents who were also killed in accidents and unfortunate circumstances. Elizabeth was first adopted by a family with 4 members. In a family outing, all 4 were killed when the car slid off the road and fell off the cliff. Miraculously, Elizabeth was completely unharmed even though she was in the car with them during the crash. The second family who took her in was a wealthy family who couldn't have their own child. Their own ship was sunk by the heavy waves while they were taking her on a cruise, and she was the only one who didn't drown. The married couple who were killed in the big collision was supposedly her 3rd adopted family. Like her prior accidents, she was also completely unscathed. For a young child to experience a number of tragedies, one would think that she was very fortunate that it was almost miraculous. To survive them all, perhaps she was indeed protected by a guardian angel. On the other hand, I also found it quite odd. I wondered why this girl was often caught in these circumstances that didn't usually happen to anyone. It seemed as if she was bringing bad luck to the people around her. But with the nature of the accidents and cataclysmic events, it couldn't be taken as anything but coincidental. It was probably due to these experiences which made her tolerant to the deaths of those who got involved with her. I walked back to her room with a lot of new questions in mind. However, I didn't know how I should ask them nor where to begin. It was quite unprofessional of me as I was driven by my own curiosity. I was only supposed to get her statement as a survivor of the tragic collision, but the interview had turned into a character assessment as I asked more than I should. Without considering her age, I asked her straightforwardly how she managed to survive the bombings of the terrorists which reduced the orphanage into rubbles and killed the other children. I asked her how she survived the collapse of the structure built with poor quality materials while she was inside when it happened. I asked her why she was the only survivor when the ship of her former foster family sunk. What I found incredibly puzzling was the car crash that killed 4 of the family members. All of them had several fractures and wounds since the car tumbled down and slammed multiple times at the trees on their way down. I simply couldn't wrap my head around the fact that she didn't even have a single scratch on her while the rest of the people inside the car had died. I bombarded her with multiple questions one after another, and all her responses did not make sense at all. What she said about having a guardian angel was not a form of expression for being extremely lucky. Elizabeth actually believed that there was an ethereal entity physically protecting her during those tragic incidents. She claimed that she was wrapped by its wings when the area was engulfed in flames. It also blocked the rubbles coming her way, and she was protected by her guardian's caring embrace when the car tumbled down the cliff. I started to get somewhat irritated since I couldn't get any viable information from her that I started to sound a bit sarcastic. With a slight smirk, I told her that the wings of her guardian angel must be withered by now. And it was then when she suddenly asked me something that left me completely speechless. Elizabeth asked me if I wanted to see her guardian angel. Just for the sake of the discussion, I told her that I might not be able to see it since I didn't believe in it, but then she said that I would if her guardian would allow me to. I was perplexed to say the least. I was doubtful for obvious reasons, but I was curious. Goosebumps crawled all over my skin as Elizabeth Carmine pointed towards the window. Apparently, she was looking at her so-called guardian angel all this time. I slowly turned my head without any expectations, and I was taken aback when I saw a figure right outside the window looking over. However, it was not an angel at all. What she claimed to be her guardian angel was a shadowy figure with black wings and glowing red eyes. Instead of an angelic figure, it looked more like a demon. It stared at me for a second, and then it disappeared. After seeing it with my own eyes, I had nothing left to say.